Welcome to another AI Journal Live. Today, me and Bill are going to be walking through a very exciting topic and a very exciting piece of research. And it's going to be a lot of fun because the word NLP is coming up a lot at the moment, and looking at how to use these trends, using these tools and platforms that are available to businesses of all sizes. And really want to take this time to show what we can do. So, Bill, would love a quick introduction from yourself, sir, and to see what it is that your background is, and delve a little bit into what we're going to be discussing today.
Sure. So, Bill Betcher, Tom, thanks for having me. It's been really a pleasure working with you and the team at AI Journal, as well as Sapio Research. This isn't our first project. This is actually our second project together. So we'll have to get started on that third project soon enough. I've been working with expert.ai for a little over a year in their marketing and product strategy group. And one of the things that I've been really fascinated with is sort of the evolution of NLP and the adoption that we've seen by some of these companies, because I feel like I've joined the AI world at the perfect time, where natural language processing is really on the upswing. And you think of all the coverage we've seen recently around ChatGPT and these large language models and the promise and maybe even the peril that they offer. It's really a great time to be exploring what organizations are doing to be successful, leveraging all this language data that they have. So super excited to be here. Let's take a look at some of the findings that are out there, because one of the things that we did is when we started this research effort, we actually started this research effort 2 years ago. And so I want to cover what we did very quickly just in the first report. So in the first report that we worked on with the AI Journal, we really focused on the role of the chief data officer and wanted to understand how were chief data officers, who historically had been working with really quantified data sets, thinks of rows and columns in a database, how were they actually thinking about their language problem? And because we know that there's such a huge amount of language data in these organizations, we wanted to get a sense of what the approach was, how maybe we could help them. And we found a couple of things that were really meaningful and helpful for us. One is that the CDO role is a little bit new in the organization, and that quite often that they have to come out and be really quick to deliver value to the business. In some ways, being working in marketing for 20 plus years, I sort of equated to the chief marketing officer role, where they have to show value within maybe 18 to 24 months, or they're going to be moving on down the road. And the role of the chief data officer, it's a little bit more specific in that they have to be able to really cut through the noise around AI and deliver meaningful business value really quickly. So in addition to putting in place all the data governance, staying compliant with GDPR, et cetera, they have to put in place actual solutions that solve business problems for their business stakeholders. One of the other things that we learned was that language data itself is really hard to interpret and get access to in a systematic way. And what I mean by that is language data is really filled with all sorts of jargon and nuance and domain-specific terminology. And a lot of times, the language projects that happen within an organization don't happen in a centralized way, say in the role of the CDO or within their group, but they're often sort of handled decentrally within the business unit. So for instance, working within the insurance industry, we work with a lot of claims teams, and the claims teams are running their own projects to handle claims validation, automation projects completely independently from the CDO, who has that more central role. One of the other big things that we learned was in regards to the different kinds of approaches that organizations are taking. And this is it's great to see that there are all different options between a platform approach, a cloud-centric approach, or even a lot of discussion around open source and what the opportunities for open source are. And it's something we're going to talk even a little bit about today. But the fact that organizations, they really just need to make a choice for the solution that's going to fit the purpose they have today, but it's also going to grow to meet their needs, right? And this is similar to any sort of technology decision that an organization makes. how do they choose what to invest in so that they don't end up in either a vendor lock-in scenario or just with dead-end technology that isn't getting the investments that are out there. The other challenge, I think, for a lot of these organizations is that they may have an initial preference to build things on their own. And a lot of the research that is out there is that in most cases for natural language applications, this is probably more of a buy versus build scenario. And so it's definitely something for teams to keep in mind. And then the last thing that we really found was that there are resource concerns. Depending on which technology choice you have is going to really dictate what kind of employees you need to bring on board. Do you need to bring on board data scientists, computational linguists? Do you need to bring on board Python developers? Just be aware that sometimes finding the people who have all of those skills combined, that's a rare skill set. It's an expensive skill set. That may have changed a little bit with the recent economic shift, but finding quality employees is always sort of tough. So those are some of the findings that we had.
Some great findings there, Bill. I'm really excited as well because you're saying it builds on from the other research that we've done together. And I mean, you see it all the time with systems that aren't up to scratch. You saw it earlier in the week, how the NHS was running on legacy systems, wasn't taking that AI knowledge gap, wasn't taking that skills gap. And it's so important that you and the team at expert.ai and what you're doing have highlighted that. So I'm really excited to run through with you on this research and share it with the audience that are either joining live or watching the recording after this. So it's some great points you're making.
Yeah, perfect. Well, let's dig into this year's report. So enough on last year's. Let's get into this year's. So this year we took a different approach, right? We weren't as interested in the role of the chief data officer. We were much more focused on people and teams that were working on natural language projects. We wanted to capture the kinds of use cases they were using. We wanted to understand the challenges that they were running into. And so we were able to go out and with the help of the AI Journal team and Sapio Research, we went out and surveyed 150 team members. And the criteria that we used was we wanted to make sure that they had some active NLP projects in place. And we had about a third of them come from Europe and about 2/3 from the North American market. But we also didn't want to limit it to pure technologists. We wanted to make sure that we also included some of the business stakeholders who were involved in these projects, business analysts, they could be actual line of business owners, to get a sense of their perspective on these projects. So 150 people, we went out, we asked them a bunch of questions. All of this information is included in the report, which I'm sure Tom can put a link to, and people can access it and download it. We're going to be able to cover a couple of highlights from the report, but let's dig in and take a look. So one of the first things that we saw, and we're really hopeful, excited to see this, was that we wanted to see a different mix of maturity levels. We wanted to have people who actually had models in production. They had models in production for several years and were maybe moving on to multiple use cases. And we were really pleased to see that. So the majority of people that we surveyed, 48% in this case, had NLP models in production for less than 2 years. The next group were individuals who had production models in place for 2 years or more, and that was 33%. And then about 20% were people who were just getting started on their journey. And this is great because we're going to come back and look at some of the findings related to these 3 different maturity approaches a little bit later in the session today. But also, it's something that we cover in a lot more detail in the report. How does maturity impact some of the challenges and some of the opportunities and how they view success? So one of the things that we found in the report, and this makes a great deal of sense, is that NLP spending is on the rise. And right, this is amongst the teams that are already working on NLP project. So this is a really hopeful sign. Teams working on NLP projects are seeing enough success that 77% of those teams are expecting to have an increase, and a pretty meaningful increase. About 40% of them are looking to see a 10% plus increase in their budget spending over the next 12 to 18 months on these NLP projects. It's not a huge surprise, right? So if 80% of the data inside an organization falls into this unstructured category, and a large part of that's language data, organizations are increasingly looking to leverage that data asset and get value from it. And for organizations that have gone through and started down that path, they've sort of cracked the code to how to get access to this language data and generate ROI for success. So 77% increase in investment. It's a great indication that companies are sort of being able to generate success, but also being able to take a little bit more, maybe a strategic approach to their language assets. So that's allowing them to expand the use of NLP across the enterprise. They can use it for different use cases. They're maybe able to get a little bit better reusability, meaning that they don't have to start from scratch for every project. And that's going to be a little bit dependent on the technology choice they make. And so we'll talk about that in a couple minutes. But also, with that reusability means that they're taking sort of less of a siloed approach, and that they're able to maybe have a better approach at minimizing the technical debt they would get from these specific projects if they were to go about it on sort of a one-off approach. And the other thing I think that's supporting this increase in spending is that NLP technology has really matured over the last several years. A lot of organizations start their sort of language journey, as I call it, with maybe a point solution to solve a really specific business problem, like understanding customer sentiment or putting in place a chatbot. Well, there have been some pretty interesting advances in terms of what large language models, transformer models, GPT is a great recent example. They've created a lot of awareness around language and what the potential is with language, but they've also lowered to some extent the startup costs, meaning that not every team has to start from scratch. They can maybe leverage some of the work that's been done in these areas. There's also the creation of platforms similar to what Expert AI offers that have made it easier for teams to really build and customize their own language models to put in place these natural language applications. So I think the key takeaway here, it really is time to explore how NLP can benefit your business. And I'm not the only one saying that. The survey data is not the only one saying that. Our colleagues in the research community are really making this statement as well. So in September, Forrester put out a presentation and some of their recommendations for organizations on where they should be focusing their investments on these emerging technologies. And they picked natural language processing as one of those areas to focus on. And they said that this is an area where most organizations should be looking at how they're going to implement a solution almost immediately, and they should expect a really quick return on that investment within 12 months. So maybe a little imperative from the analyst community: get a plan in place, think about what you're actually going to do. They covered a couple of other topics, one of which I'll note is called explainable AI. And we'll come back to this topic a little bit more later because we asked one or two questions about this. But in essence, explainable AI is a topic that's getting a lot more coverage as organizations and ethicists are asking questions around how can we make sure that AI is good for society? How can we make sure that it's sustainable? How can we understand what is inside some of these black box models, that there aren't any inherent biases? And so I think we could probably have a whole separate session on explainable AI and some of the faux pas that we've seen that are out there.
Maybe next time we can have a whole nother session around that. But it's so important, you're saying, around the roadmap and making sure that people are aware of it, and especially the topics that we're going to be looking at, the use cases, the maturity, and all these different approaches. It's so important, because if businesses don't consider it, Bill, it's something that's not going away, especially as the rise of ChatGPT. So really fascinating insights, and I'm really excited to kind of delve into what's next with what you're saying with the use cases and delving into this. It'd be brilliant.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I would add is, most teams shouldn't feel like they're alone. Right? There are other people who are on this same journey, and there are groups of experts who can actually help guide them along that way. So if you don't have a good sense of where to start, reach out to some of your colleagues, and there are great communities out there. Go to an event where they're talking about natural language technologies and different applications of it, and you can get a great sense of where organizations are gaining value. That was one of the things that we had focused on in the report, was really getting an understanding of what are some of the use cases that are being used to solve business problems. Where does the business see value in this? And largely they broke down into three common areas, right? It was the ability to go out and look at these complex documents, reports, any sort of place you could put content and language data, and to go through and try to see if there was a way to minimize the errors, get it done a little bit quicker, and lower the costs of manual approaches. So when we see the use cases around protecting data, that's a very common area where organizations are trying to maintain their GDPR compliance. They may have to remove specific health information, symptoms, people's names, social security numbers, etc., but also extending it over to understand complex documents like contracts. And what are the details within the contracts? What are we being signed up to commit to? What revenue opportunities do we have as we go through this process of contract analytics and digitizing our contracts? Another key area where we see organizations focus is in this ability to get insight and find what we call signal through the noise. And this really is finding out what the market is saying, what customers are saying, maybe what competitors are even doing. And a lot of times this comes down to concepts around sentiment analysis, or going through and putting in place knowledge management best practices and taxonomies, so that it's a lot easier to find information within organizations. I had heard from a colleague just yesterday. They were at a trade show in Europe, and I won't name it, but it was a Fortune 200 company. Their chief data officer came up to our booth and said, "Hey, can you help? I've got 1,600 scientists who can't find the research that they've already wrote." Right? And there's just such a wealth of information in some of these organizations that it's very difficult to go and necessarily find something. And unfortunately, that means there might be a high degree of rework. So that they'll actually have to go recreate the original work so that they can go publish it, share it, etc. But there also are very strong opportunities to find the signal through the noise in areas like fraud detection and anti-money laundering activities, where you can start to see and make connections between different bad actors or even adverse event in news, and understand how that might impact what you're doing. The last area, and this is an area we see a lot of nowadays, is in organizations looking at use cases that are going to help them drive intelligent process automation. So a lot of times we've seen coverage over the last 10 years or so around RPA and the benefits of that. Well, if you added a degree of language intelligence and in essence were able to create NLP bots, this would be intelligent process automation. And so we do a lot of work in regard to this, helping organizations to take what are sort of language intensive activities. Think of claims processing in insurance, or think of all the emails that get sent into your local bank. How do you read the email, understand the intent of what is being asked for, and then route it correctly to the different response groups? So there's a real broad set of use cases out there that different organizations are using. And it really, the choice comes down to where to get started for people who are in this newer area. And you'll see as in our next slide, actually, that organizations having maybe a little bit of a tough time getting alignment with the business on where to get started.
Yeah, such an important point. It's and we've got a question that kind of touches on that we'll come to of where to get started, because it's the thing, right? And these are brilliant insights. I mean, when I saw these were the use cases, it really opened to my eyes of what is going to be possible, what is possible, and if they've got the right roadmap, as you said, Bill, what can be possible to really affect positive change and really deliver impact for their communities, for their customers, through the power of the data that they've got, or or can quickly get hold of, especially if it's not so siloed and all put in correct space. So some great insights, Bill.
Yep. Well, and Shang, I see your question, and we'll get to that topic in just a minute. And if we don't get to it, Tom, keep me honest and bring me back to it.
Absolutely.
So one of the areas we looked at in terms of the different maturity of the organizations was in terms of what are some of the challenges that they're actually facing. So we broke the groups out into 3 different categories. We had evaluators and experimenters. We had teams that were in production for 2 years or less with their models, and then teams that were in production for 2 years or more. And there are a number of similarities across the groups, and we'll focus on the similarities first. One is data security and governance, and the need to stay compliant and keep the data safe is really a big deal for a lot of teams. It's also a big hindrance and slows down a lot of progress on projects. Working from the vendor side, we often see that we'll have proof of concepts that are delayed, and sometimes it takes much longer just to get access to the data than the actual length of the proof of concept. And it's maybe a testament to how strong the governance rules are, but it's also a little bit of a concern in that maybe the rules are actually slowing down progress to some extent. This is also a big area of concern around security and governance if a team is looking to work with a cloud solution. So a lot of organizations are still rightly so sensitive about putting their personal proprietary information out into the cloud. Yeah. And like I had just mentioned, right, choosing what the right use case is and what use case will provide an ROI is an ongoing topic within the organization. And so I think the biggest thing here is to focus on solving a problem that's a real business problem and has a real big benefit in return. And I don't want to put a dollar value on it, but it's probably going to have several zeros at the end of it, right? I wouldn't look today to try to solve small language problems. I would look to try to find big language problems that are going to have a material impact on the organization in terms of cost control, in terms of revenue opportunity, in terms of driving some sort of competitive differentiation.
I love that.
The other area that is quite common is understanding what the cost implications of the different approaches are, right? So whatever the business case is that organizations decide on, they really need to keep in mind what the costs of solving the problem are, not just the startup costs around getting the solution in place, but the ongoing support costs related to it. Because most of the time, these language models and the applications, they require ongoing tuning, maintenance, and engagement because there may be aspects around data drift, model drift, etc. And this is something that it's really meaningful for organizations to keep in mind. And so even the choice of the AI methodology, which we'll get to in a second, they can have cost implications as well, because some of these large language models, they may be really compute power intensive. They can require and consume a great deal of cycles and can drive up costs. Similarly, so some of the cloud platform elements, that once that ticker gets going, those numbers tend to add up pretty quickly. And I think you'll see that as organizations start to get using concepts like GPT-3, you're going to see that there are going to be some surprising bills that come in. And all of a sudden, the CFO is going to wake up and say, hold on, we need to put a rule in place to make sure that we're not getting these massive bills from experimentation and people doing really cool things. And one area I do want to point out that's a little bit different is the difference between the people who are in that early evaluation phase and the people who are much more mature in their models is the focus on choosing what the right AI approach is versus the difference of achieving a level of accuracy and ROI. So one thing that we saw was that there wasn't as much of an issue around choosing the approach to use for the more mature organizations, but for the newbies, so to speak, they really had a sort of a difficult choice. Which is the right approach to get us accuracy levels we need. And then in these more mature groups, it seemed as though they were much more concerned with increasing the accuracy so that it could drive an ROI and they could put the models into production. And so that's something I think to be aware of, is that as you look to make those early choices in terms of what the AI approach is, make sure that you still leave room and choose an approach that will allow you to drive higher degrees of accuracy and tuning over time, because that might be the difference between getting something deployed successfully or not.
Yeah. Really interesting. Yeah, and it's exciting to see what it will lead to as well. If people come over these challenges and what they can have, because that's the key thing, right? That you mentioned, maturity, understanding where people are on that journey. And I think you'll be looking at it next, the top technologies for powering these NLP use cases, which will be very exciting to see.
Yeah, so not too surprising, right? There are lots of options out there, and for a lot of companies, their first language project is probably going to be around a point solution, right? It's exploring a voice of the customer, or understanding employee feedback, or maybe it's building out a chatbot. A lot of organizations have a relationship with sort of the big four vendors in the cloud world, and that they are getting an internal mandate. Hey, why don't you see if you can do that on AWS or Azure or whatever the case is? And so those are sort of turnkey solutions that are out there. And I'm sure all of us know somebody who's a DIYer and loves to build everything themselves from scratch. And there are great software open source projects that are out there to do that. They do tend to come with some hidden costs in terms of you need a really diverse set of people who can build and maintain those open source projects. And then lastly, NL platforms, right? And NL platforms, not surprisingly, in this audience of people who are actively working NL projects, came out on top. There's a lot of benefits they get, because one of the inherent elements in a natural language platform is that there's a great deal of reusability across project areas. And it makes a ton of sense, right? If you're going to put together a knowledge model that's going to be specific to your company, your enterprise, your domain, well, you can reuse that knowledge model across different use cases, because it has all of your terminology in it, it has all of your product branding, everything that you sort of care about. It has your process baked into it to some extent. And it's that reusability that helps to drive that ROI, meaning that lower marginal cost for the next project. It also reduces the debt, right? Technical debt it's sort of a dirty term. People don't want to talk about it, but it's a real problem when you go from point solution to point solution to point solution, and without really taking a step back and having a little bit more of a strategic approach. So I think the thing to keep in mind, and we hear this quite often, is that choose the approach that fits the purpose for your use case. Right. So you're going to have a specific project in mind. Well, make sure that the vendor that you choose can offer the capabilities that you need to support that use case specifically. And then you can maybe take a look towards the future and say, well, could this same vendor support me for my next use case?
Got you. And would you say that as well, Bill, just to quickly ask the question and probe a little bit there, because I'm sure there might be people joining us and watching the recording that are learning about this and really trying to understand how they can implement it into their business. If you were looking at two different industries, and from the knowledge you have at expert.ai and all the different sectors that you operate in, and what you've seen over the years, is there something and I hope I'm asking this correctly, between a point solution and the open approach? And you're mentioning bits there, but are there kind of 3 key points to consider, or areas to consider if you're taking this to your leadership, or you're taking it, say you're a new person in a data team coming in and saying, this is the approach we need? What would you kind of give as advice of what to think about in a business, say an agricultural business or a pharmaceutical company or an insurance where it's so big, or health records? I'd love to know.
Yeah, I think one of the things to keep in mind is that language, unlike other more quantifiable data types, is really domain and industry dependent, in that the language in insurance is different than the language in agriculture or in manufacturing. And that if you're engaging with a point solution, typically those point solutions are more focused, I would say, horizontally across a use case, which might be like sentiment analysis for employees. But it doesn't have any real insight or understanding of insurance. And so where you're going to see probably the greatest benefit is where you can bring together knowledge, general knowledge around sort of the world we live in, but also industry specific knowledge. And then lastly, company specific knowledge. Think of it as like a knowledge pyramid. And in order to be successful with language projects, you need to have all three layers of that pyramid so that you can understand the intent of the language and then extract the meaning and value from it. So I think that's one approach. There are a lot of great language models out there that solve different purposes. Some are very vertical in nature, but the challenge being is a lot of those are open source, and it requires a whole degree of expertise that you have to almost staff up a team of language experts to bring in and put it together. And I think that's part of the reason why a lot of some of the analyst organizations that we engage with, they're starting to come out and say, if you're trying to solve a language problem, it's probably better for you to buy a solution than try to build something yourself. They go so far as to say there are maybe some really specific edge cases where you need to build a language solution yourself. But in most cases, you should probably take a look and see what's available in the market, specifically in the market or industry in which you work, because you can get a great, it's a lot easier to start with a smart perspective and a little bit of language insight than to just start from scratch.
Yeah. I'm also hearing then that, and I think you'll be touching on it as well, the context of it's quite important, as you were saying. So the difference between which area, how you're applying it, and like most things, the context in which it's being spoken, or the way that you're looking at the data is such a big driver for what solution to guide you right problem, the right situation.
Well, and so it's a great lead in, because it was one of the questions we had asked in the survey was what were the most important characteristics of their NLP technology choices. And so there's a wide variety of requirements and attributes that sort of came to the top. And some of them are really specific to the technology type. So the trick here is to understand what you're trying to get out of your NLP technology investment, right? And it's sort of saying, well, take the long view approach, and a set of attributes, no matter which column they are in this chart, could be a great way to sort of set a short list of vendor requirements. What am I looking for in order to be able to solve my specific problem? And so here you'll see concepts around RPA integration. You'll see concepts around knowledge models. And so those are those models that we talked about, that pyramid. You'll see the ability to support multiple languages. That's a big deal for a lot of organizations, is they want to get a degree of repeatability. They build it in English, they want it to work in French. If they were in French, they want it to work in German. And that's a big decision that organizations sort of have to make is, well, are we looking for a single language solution or a multi-language solution? If that's the case, then you should probably choose a vendor who can support that approach. And maybe that's the bigger, takeaway is that whatever you choose in terms of whether it's a big tech vendor's cloud offering, or you're trying to take a little bit more strategic approach and build out a platform of capabilities, you really need to just go through and do your diligence to verify whatever the vendor is that you're engaged with, can they support what your key criteria are? And I hate to say that some vendors may actually promise more than they can deliver, but I think this is one of those areas where you're in a trust but verify mentality, and that the homework that you do as a planning NLP, what your NLP needs are likely to be, is going to really benefit you in the long term. It's going to make it a lot easier to find the kind of capabilities you want. It's going to help you structure the right proof of concept or proof of value experiments that you want to have, so that you end up with a solution or a technology approach that's going to grow with you and your organization.
Love that. Yeah. So important to have the right solution that can take you to the next stage that you need, and rather than just jumping. And I always say it, I've said it for as long as I think I've known you, Bill, to stop yourself from just jumping in straight away, understanding that blueprint, understanding what it might be, and really understanding what it is at the customer's end, what you actually want to achieve and what do you want to build and what's the right solution for you, rather than just trying to put a one size fits all model. So really, really valuable point, Bill.
Yeah, and so we actually sort of dug in a little bit deeper, one layer deeper on a specific topic. So you'll see here that machine learning AI approach is important in cloud, or a symbolic AI approach is important for point solutions. We wanted to dig in and say, we know, right? So we've done 300 different natural language projects over the company's history. We know that the choice of methodology can really make or break the success of a project.
Yeah.
And the findings that we had were about 80% were using some machine learning and deep learning approach. 52% were using some combination of symbolic and rules-based approach. And there's great value in both of these approaches. And we are really strong advocates. If you're trying to solve a complex problem, so something that is an enterprise grade problem, it has a degree of industry complexity to it, that you're going to be best suited using what we call a hybrid approach. And Forrester's actually calls it a hybrid approach. If you go to Gartner, they call it composite AI. And it's really this concept that I can get the best of both worlds and bring it together. I may be in a situation where I do not have a lot of training materials. I just don't have access to it because of governance issues, or maybe they don't exist. And that is a really big issue if you're going with a machine learning or a deep learning approach, because they need a lot of training material to be successful. Well, combining some of what you can do with symbolic or rules-based, you can still get really highly accurate results when there's very little training data available.
That's awesome. To know you can get through that with that basis. That's awesome, Bill.
Yeah, well, and we'll see this a little bit in the next slide. Is some of these approaches are also very compute intensive, and they don't help to explain why their choices were made, right? So they're a little bit of a black box approach. And one of the other concepts is that quite often, in order to reach the top of that value pyramid, you need to bring humans back into the loop. And those humans are the experts on the process at that organization. They know what the edges are, the edge problems, those specific claims that come in that break the process, so to speak. And being able to codify that domain and process knowledge from an SME will help to really improve the results and let you actually drive a whole degree of fine tuning. So Shang had asked the question. I'm going to get to it right now and say the question he asked was, any recommendations on models to use with transfer learning? Could you share case studies of how we might adapt it to a certain domain? And so we didn't explicitly ask this question, but one of the hottest topics nowadays is really how do concepts like large language models, transformers, GPT 3.x, how do they change what's possible, right? Because there are versions of sort of deep learning that are out there. And I really can sort of make an argument that we're going to start to see the emergence of this hybrid AI 3.0. And it's going to fuse together the benefits of machine learning, the benefits of symbolic, and the benefits of deep learning, so that each have something that they can contribute. And it wouldn't be fair to say, you should use this approach. It's the tried and true approach. It'll work across any use case that you have. It's going to be a project by project decision, because each of the LLMs have their own quirks in terms of what they're good at. And that's really part of why it makes sense to engage with an expert, someone who can help actually navigate that world. someone who has experience in prompt engineering, so that you don't end up spending $500,000 reaching out to GPT 3.0 and only getting $100,000 worth of value back from it. It's still early days a little bit in regards to this, but I think that is maybe the direction that we're heading.
Love it. And thank you, Shang, for the question. Really valuable to understand that kind of point of view as to what you were saying, Bill. And yeah, looking forward to the next point, going into responsible AI, because it's a big question today of how to make sure it is doing, as you said, and not all black box thinking. So very, very
well. It is. I mean, this is a question we asked, and so what we asked was, when you guys are planning your natural language projects and you consider how responsible, are you actually taking a step back and saying, is it explainable? Is it sustainable from an energy perspective? Is it unbiased? And we were happy to see that about 3/4 of them said, yeah, we are actually making these considerations. And I think it's great that these teams are planning for the future. They're trying to be good AI citizens, and they realize that increasingly there are ethicists, there are regulatory groups, there's regulations that are being put in place that are trying to put in practice guidelines around what responsible AI is, and setting an expectation on commercial organizations that they're going to have to be able to live up to these expectations, right? Yeah. So for sustainability, if you are using one of these large language models, they consume a ton of energy. There are alternatives where if you combine them with concepts like hybrid AI, you can take less computational requirements, use less energy, generate a lower carbon footprint, and maybe get a higher degree of accuracy overall.
Yeah.
Another element is around the ability to include humans as part of the design objectives. So by including a human objective to shape how the AI works, that's sort of almost the opposite of how a lot of machine learning approaches are. It's not human objective centered, it's around solving for an algorithm.
Got you.
Transparency is another area, right? And this is one where you see the EU AI Act. You'll see that there's a similar regulatory discussions going on in the US market. But increasingly, organizations are going to need to be ready to answer questions either internally for their own governance or externally to regulatory groups around how they came to a specific result. How can you prove that that result wasn't biased in some way? And then not only how you came to that result, but show me where the data that came from, traceability of the data to show how it contributed to what that outcome is. And there are some real potential, what I call regulatory teeth around organizations that fail to do that and may actually be incurring a bias towards a specific group, class of individuals through their automation approach. And then lastly is this concept around human-centered. And it's the need to make sure that if there is a bias or something misleading, that there is an opportunity to correct that. And that one of the easiest ways maybe to correct that is to keep a human in the loop. So having a human in the loop is a very common concept around natural language solutions. And it's something that we fully support at expert.ai as the way to keep your subject matter experts as part of the solution model development. And not only does it help with the accuracy of having a more accurate model, it actually also helps with the general adoption across the organization. So quite often when you're putting in place automation activities, people may fear that they're going to be replaced by robots. Yeah. Well, if you can give them and support them in the project and include them as part of the development, capturing their expertise, they're going to have a much better understanding of how they fit into the process and realize that they're not necessarily being replaced as much as they're being augmented, meaning that their time is being freed up so they can do the most complex things, the most high value activities, and the lower value repetitive stuff where they may not get as much enjoyment is actually going to be taken over through the automation approaches.
Yeah, I love it. Some really good cases that I'm excited to see as well, because all those things, they're 4 key priorities for me, like making sure you are sustainable, practical, transparent, and human-centered. And it's really great that the research showed 74% strongly agree. And quickly, just to address 2 questions, this is recorded. You can watch it on download. We're aware some of you will be watching this in between meetings or calls, but it will be available for you to watch on demand and to come back to at any point that you need. But really excited to see. And I would love to know, Bill, looking forward, what kind of results that this kind of thinking's had, and being responsible, and what we've discussed so far, what it can have for a business, what kind of better decisions can businesses make. You touched on it, but I think if we can delve into that, that'd be brilliant.
Yeah, well, I think there are a couple things, right? Being a good corporate citizen is there's a benefit unto itself. Increasingly, you're going to see growth around ESG concepts, right? So environmental, social, and governance, regulatory concepts, which could impinge on AI, as well as concepts around sustainability. Like our organizations essentially consuming so much power to try to solve and automate these processes that it's actually becoming a detriment to the rest of society. But I think the biggest one is around ethics, and the fact that as more and more decision making becomes automated, do we have really true visibility into how those decisions are made? Do we understand that the data that's being used to make these decisions is really unbiased? There are some well-known examples around large technology companies and them screening of resumes, and the bias that was just inherent in the screening of the resumes caused them to create a real meaningful gender bias.
Yeah.
Well, that's the kind of stuff that I think people are looking to build out, to train out. And the only way to train it out is to be able to go in and inspect and see that it's not there. So I think there's still work to be done. I think increasingly, as organizations are put under the microscope and fines are delivered, and in some cases, these fines may actually result in the loss of intellectual property, in that certain concepts and algorithms might be taken away and they're not allowed to use them. I think as those discussions happen, we'll see a lot more focus on responsible AI. I think on the academic side, there's a number of universities that are focused on this topic and trying to get out and lead organizations on how they can do a better job.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And it's great to note as well that what you're doing, what you're saying with the research side and working with the universities and the educational side, the academic side, to understand all these implications. So it's always valuable to me that I know a company's thinking about these kind of angles and thinking around their customer with these kind of angles. Because as you said, or as I see it, Bill, areas such as healthcare, insurance, finance, you get into all sorts of conversations, all sorts of data that can easily be misled, easily misunderstood, and it's brilliant to have those principles for successful transformation.
Yeah. So this really sort of summarizes and completes the findings that I highlighted from the report. But we didn't cover maybe nearly half of the material that's in the report. So I would highly suggest, if you're interested in looking for something to read over a long weekend, download a copy of the report. Reach out, see if you have any questions. Before I sign off, I just want to give a little bit of background on Expert AI, right? So Expert AI, we've been delivering natural language solutions for our entire existence. And we've delivered 300 active projects to some of the world's largest organizations in insurance, in banking, in publishing, in media, as well as supporting different federal and national government efforts. But at the core of what we do is we help to essentially unlock language and turn it into data so that teams can make better decisions. And those better decisions can be related to automated decisions around claims. It could be related to being able to employ more meaningful semantic search capabilities to find lost research, lots of different ways that organizations can leverage this language once they've been able to classify it and put it in a format where it's consumable and usable for the different outcomes that they have. We've got a number of partners that we work with around the world, both from a service delivery as well as from a technology partnership. But fundamentally, what Expert AI does is we take whatever data you have, whatever format, whatever the repository is, we capture it, we ingest it, and we derive insights. And those insights can come in the form of understanding intent, understanding what the sentiment is, extracting health data from eHealth records. And we do that using a hybrid approach. And then we prepare that data so it's easily consumed and actioned by any system you have, whether it's an application that we offer out of the box, or you want to include it in your own internal application. You want to use it for RPA activities, put it into your BI system for further analytics. A lot of flexibility on how you can consume this information.
Yeah.
So if you have a language problem, reach out to us and we're happy to have a discussion.
Yeah. And I'd encourage everyone as well that is watching even now on the recording to reach out to Bill and the team. I mean, we've linked the research in the description to this. We're sharing it constantly through the AI journal because we really believe the value in which it's giving to businesses. And as you could see there through 2 slides ago, the value that they've delivered to some of the world's biggest titans in that industry. So it's really exciting to see you delivering this change, not only from a business level, but as you said, also on a governmental level towards initiatives that really do initiate change and really do help the end user. It's a very important topic, and it's it's fascinating to see how it's being used and how you're making use of companies' data to help them grow, to support them grow, and to help them understand the customer better, Bill.
Well, it's been a great opportunity. I appreciate it for letting me come on and share. I don't know if there are any questions that are out there. By all means, you can always follow up with Tom or I if you want to ask a question privately. We're happy to have a discussion. Are there any questions that have come through, Tom?
Not since Shang's one, no, apart from people asking if it's being recorded, which is the answer yes. And we'll be sending this to all of you that have joined today and all registrants that are currently not here with us today. But we'll be sending that as well as a reminder to your email to follow up on, to watch in your own time.
All right. Well, hey, I appreciate it, Tom. Thank you. Always a pleasure to chat with you. I'll look forward to our next session.
I'm looking forward to it as well, Bill. I really appreciate you taking the time today. And to all of you joining, massive thank you again. We love doing these kind of video series to bring you the best knowledge, best insight to help your companies grow. That's what it's all about. And we look forward to joining on the next one. Bill, a massive thank you again to you and the team at Expert AI, and for every single one of you joining us today, either live or on a recording. See you on the next one.
All right. Thank you, guys.